Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and thanks to our audience who's joining us live here. We're here in snowy Davos on the, I think, 4th day. It's all a blur at this moment. But we're here to really have a conversation with my esteemed panel, but also with this audience about what's next. What do we need to get done? So in December, so not very long ago, we had a historic moment in Montreal, the Kunming-Montreal Convention on Biodiversity, COP15. And it was historic because we were all coming out of the pandemic. It was delayed. It was challenging to organize. I have to admit, as an environmentalist, I did not go in there with high hopes. And yet, I think most would agree we at least came pretty close to our ambitions. We left Montreal with a global biodiversity framework and a general agreement among countries to protect 30% of their land and water within the next 30 years. That really is a historic achievement, and honestly, looking back on that, you know, if someone told me this today, I'd have pinched myself that came out of it. Now, we have to get to the business of how do we make this happen. The clock is ticking. The countries have set this ambition. The things that we've asked them to do, they've said, okay, we're signing up for it, right? But now reality sets in. How do we actually get businesses, communities, youth, and government to make progress on this massive, massive ambition? So I have a phenomenal panel. I should mention, my name is Sanjayan. I'm the CEO of Conservation International. I'm here to learn, just as you are, from our esteemed panel. I've got someone, and I'll get to the introductions more formally in a few minutes here, but basically someone representing the agricultural sector, someone representing the mining industry. Now, so these two are often seen as major biodiversity sort of negative industries. So why are they up here? What are they going to say? I've got someone on the front lines in many, many ways, from Kenya, front lines of a forest, of a community, of youth, so the next generation, of restoration. Would love to hear from her and her ground-up perspective. And then who's going to pay for all of this? Where's the money coming from? So Torben there might help give some insight into this at the end. But to level set for all of us, what does this really look like from the perspective of a country? I have a real champion for nature, the minister from Ecuador, Gustavo Manrique. You know, Ecuador is a mega biodiverse country. It's got Yasuni National Park is often seen as the national park with the highest terrestrial biodiversity on planet Earth. And yet they have massive challenges. They've got a growing population. There is societal pressures. There's the need for development. You've got agriculture. You've got mining. You've got all of these issues. And you're at a crossroads right now. You're at a crossroads right now about how you achieve your 30 by 30 ambitions and the trade-offs you need to make. So, Minister, if you could just frame this for us and give us the reality of what it's like to be in your shoes for a few minutes.
Thank you, Sanjayan. Good morning to everyone. For me, it's a pleasure being here, sharing with you this panel. Before reading these 1.5 minute words and then sharing a couple more ideas that I was thinking this morning to share with this panel, I want to let you know that I've been 25 years in the business of saving the planet. I've been in the private sector. I have a sustainable company, and my main reason was to convincing private sector to move to sustainability. I founded my company in year 97, 98, so I have a lot of arguments that I have learned with private sector to move to sustainability. So I want to share a couple thoughts on that, Sanjayan. So before that, I think that in this morning we have a dialogue, a unique opportunity to heal our broken relationship with nature. We do not have many such opportunities, and we have taken advantage of this unmissable moment to make the difference and safeguard the future of present and future generations. As has been said before, Sanjayan, business and financial institutions are required to assess and disclose their impacts and dependencies on nature. The first 15 years of the advising of this private sector, my main argument to convince that is that climate change, the floods, the temperature, that we were losing biodiversity. But then it came a couple arguments that probably you have heard me before in other panels, and it's the value of nature, but the value in terms of currency, the value in terms of money. And I don't know if you know that in Costa Rica, for example, a pound of a marlin is worth $750. And a pound of a marlin in Ecuador is worth $3. So you said, is that expensive, Costa Rica? They said, no. It's that they learn, or they know, that a marlin lives 20 years, more or less, 20, 25 years. And they create a public policy around that to make an economic system of catch and release and ecotourism around that. And why in Costa Rica, in Ecuador is $3? It's because we make it ceviche. So in Costa Rica, the sector of ecotourism, being 5 times less or smaller than Ecuador, it sells $5.6 billion. And in Ecuador, the tourism sector or ecotourism sector is 1.6 billion, having the Galapagos and 14 different nationalities of indigenous community. So I think we have more assets in terms of ecotourism. But they create this public policy around catch and release, so they rent boats, they rent hotels, they have their spas, everything around that. So they convince the private sector that living a life nature is more profitable. And the other lesson learned for me, that this is the argument for the private sector, is that it came to my hands studies from PwC, Ernst & Young, Deloitte & Touche, that the companies that manage their companies, their financial statements, considering the gas emissions, they are between 15 and 22% more profitable in those 6 expenses than the others that doesn't manage their company. And when you go to a company and you argue that you want to save the world, they, okay, yeah, but I have to make profit. But when you say, do you want to be 15 to 22% more profitable? They say, yes, what do I have to do? So I really believe that we have to download a language with the private sector that to save nature is a good business.
Yeah.
That's the language we have to share with them. So that's I had other things that I wanted to share, but I prefer to focus on that thing. In my experience, being 25 years in the private sector, convincing corporates to move to sustainability, my last 10 years has been numbers, and they move faster. So that's the truth. Sorry for being so straightforward, but I really believe in that specific move can accelerate decisions.
Thank you, Minister Gustavo, Manrique, Miranda. I really appreciate your perspective. Numbers move faster than hearts. I think that's sort of a top line that the minister was saying. So I'm going to now turn to the panel. Thank you, sir.
I have to leave too.
I know, it's fine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm really going to ask you to be brief because I want to come back to you, and I really want the audience to have a chance to at least ask a couple of questions to you. Sven, I'm going to start with you. Give me 1 minute on Yara International. You're the CEO and president of this agricultural firm, but just set the context for us. What do you do? Who are you? And agriculture, obviously, massive land use. If you think about the 12.5 gigatons that goes out in the atmosphere every year from our destruction of nature, ag is the biggest size, of it. So there's also an opportunity to make the biggest transformation. What can the agricultural sector do? What is Yara International? Why are you here?
Okay, so Yara International is one of the largest fertilizer producers in the world, and for us it's been a journey. I went unprepared, I think, to the Paris agreement discussions in December 2015, and we had to spend a whole year following that, redefining everything about our company, starting with our mission, our vision, our values, building our strategy around the sustainable development goals. Now that there's been a major breakthrough with the global biodiversity framework, as you said initially, this time we were more prepared. We've been part of the Champions for Nature, started 2020. I'm discussing.
You've been involved in this since the beginning, certainly at the
and I'm looking at Eva here that's been teaching me about this for a long time as well. So we came into it more prepared, and it's important to have business on board as well. And there are business opportunities in this, because if we put a price or a value on nature, then we drive farming differently as well. Because what are we really as a fertilizer company? Well, we're replacing nutrients that we remove from the field when we take the crop away, right? Mm-hmm. And if there's no value to nature, well, then you mine the soil of its nutrients and you leave that behind and you move on and you destroy nature to get the nutrients, because that's free. But if you rather think about it from a business perspective, that we put back the nutrients we removed, not more, not less, and think about this more as a soil health perspective, healthy soil, healthy crops, then we have a very different business model. So for us, this has been a trigger, but we've already been preparing for this. And we think about this in a business perspective. And really, if you want to drive this at scale, you need to have business working together on this as well, but putting the farmers in the center so that we drive incentives for them to help them farm sustainably.
So 2 quick follow-ups for you. So if farmers keep their soil healthier, doesn't that mean less business for you because they'll buy less fertilizer?
Yes, and that's fine.
Okay.
But
you heard it here. Okay, that's great.
But it changes the business model as well, because I'm not here to sell the maximum amount of fertilizer. Actually, I'm spending most of my time selling less. But it's about using the right fertilizer in a world that really puts value to the farmers and what they do. Will buy different kinds of fertilizer, move from commodity that has less efficiency to premium, working for solutions rather than just piling on fertilizer. So that's very suitable to our business model, and that's part of our journey. So if there's less fertilizer consumption, if we increase nutrient use efficiency, great. And we will never prosper in a world that is not prospering. So this is
great. We'll never prosper in a world that's not prospering. And you're clearly a leader in the industry, but do you see the industry moving as well?
Absolutely, and it's great to see the effort from the International Fertilizer Association and with the Director General, Elspeth Klein. She's doing a tremendous work at this. We're working with the entire industry, and we just put out a report on how the whole industry both reduce its own emissions in the production of fertilizer, but also nutrient use efficiency. And I was pleased to see that Secretary Kerry also came with a support for that. But it's an ongoing work, and it's a journey for the whole industry as well. But I'm really pleased to see the progress.
Thank you. Jonathan, coming over to you, used to be at BHP, now you lead Teck Resources, Canadian-based company. Tell us a little bit about Teck and about the amazing commitment that you've made as a mining company.
Yeah, so Teck Resources, based in Canada, we are mining through the US, Canada, Chile and Peru. We've also got future projects in each of those regions. The focus of the company is the production of critical minerals that are needed to support decarbonisation. And the way in which that happens is decarbonisation is mainly driven by electrification, and that requires huge amounts of copper, whether that's for electric vehicles, for batteries, for grid transmission, or for the renewable infrastructure itself. Now, the challenge we have before us is we need to mine more of that copper than ever before, but do that in a more responsible way than ever before with the lowest environmental footprint possible. Before this session, you challenged me on the fact that it was hard to understand why there was a mining company here. I'll say two things about that. Firstly, there was a very interesting report from McKinsey in December of last year that coincided with COP15, and it looked at where the impacts on biodiversity come from on a sectoral basis. And of course, we know there's farming and forestry and retail have the biggest impact there. Now, that report stated that mining has 0.1% of the impact on terrestrial biodiversity. So you could say, well, that's not a very large impact, but the impact we do have through the construction of mines and the facilities that go around those, of course, is quite profound for the communities that we operate in and for the indigenous groups in particular who have been the traditional custodians of that land. So there's a real imperative for us to do something here. So what we did in the middle of last year, we were the first mining company to make a commitment to be nature positive by 2030. What that means for us is for every hectare of land that we disturb through our own activities, we will conserve or rehabilitate 3 hectares of land, which is where we get that positive impact from. We are now accelerating the rate of rehabilitation at our mine sites. So rather than leaving that activity to the end of mine life, we are rehabilitating at the same time as we are developing mines. And that involves reforming the land. It involves replanting vegetation. We're also partnering with conservation organisations, so the Nature Conservancy of Canada, for example, where we have so far preserved 14,000 hectares of land, which is about 40% of our mining footprint, and we're investing $25 million in a whole series of new projects. In addition to sort of the things we can control within our own footprint, we've been advocating very strongly at the International Council of Metals and Mining for collective action on nature, and that is a group that comprises the 26 of the world's largest mining companies. A number of those other companies have since committed to be nature positive, and it's one of the highest priorities we have as an industry body for 2023, which will involve setting the standards. It will involve having the right reporting frameworks in place. We're piloting this year the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures to see if that will help. We've actually been reporting on biodiversity for 20 years, but we'd like to do this in a consistent way across the industry. And our other big focus is on partnerships, because we recognize we can't do this alone. We're not the experts in this field. We were in Montreal in December for exactly that reason, to work with other groups to learn about best practices so we can accelerate our own activities in this area.
Jonathan, what about water? Because I spent a lot of time in Montana. You know, some of those rivers are been heavily polluted by mining activity that took place some time ago. So yes, you have a small footprint if you just look at the mine, but of course, if tailings get into waterways, it could have, you know, tremendous impact. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a significant component of what we are addressing. Over recent years, we've spent $1.2 billion actually in water management and water treatment for some of our operations close to the boundary with Montana in British Columbia. We'll probably spend another $750 million in the years ahead of us. So we've been very active in addressing that issue. I'll give you another example, though. We're building a large copper project at the moment in Chile, again, to support the decarbonisation efforts. It's no longer feasible or viable to access water from aquifers in countries like Chile. They have a long-standing drought. They need that water for communities. They need that water for agriculture. So we're building a desalination plant, so 100% of our water needs will be produced from that desalination facility, and that will be powered on a 100% basis by renewable energy. So we're taking a variety of actions which significantly increase the cost of the projects that we build and significantly increase the cost of operating these projects. But there's both a moral imperative and a good business imperative to do these things in the right way.
And your customers, I would assume, are wanting, you know, that level of certainty in terms of sourcing these minerals and metals.
It's interesting at the moment. There's a lot of talk in our sector about a green premium being paid for metals with the lowest carbon footprint or with the lowest biodiversity impact. We don't see that yet coming through, Premia probably will exist first at the consumer end. We work in a business-to-business model, but what will help that is data and traceability of the origin of minerals all the way through a value chain, so we can, have some efficacy behind asking for that premia to be paid.
Manju, let me turn to you. So the other side of the equation, you're on the front lines. I heard a little bit of your story last night. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you do and the sort of the groundswell of support and movement you've created in the communities you're working in on the foothills of Mount Kenya. I believe, is it Aberdares or Mount Kenya?
No, Mount Kenya.
Mount Kenya. And how businesses, because obviously that's the focus to some extent here, can help or hinder it, because you had a specific incident with a business operation what's what prompted you to go on your path.
Thank you very much. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that nature will have to exist with the people. 2018, I ran a campaign called Save Our Forest KE that sought to put a ban on forest harvesting in national and community forests. It was successful because government imposed a ban that's still in place. But how do you take away people's livelihoods without giving them an alternative? And that's when I started realizing that climate action cannot be punitive. When I look at forests, and the minister said something profound. He said, to save nature is good business. Even for me, I believe that to save nature is really good business. And one of the things that the communities living around forests and other ecosystems can benefit from, and particularly forest, I think, is beekeeping, for instance, or apiculture. The demand for honey in Kenya and globally is quite high. Bees are good for the ecosystem. They pollinate up to 85% of the food crops that we consume. So Kenya has committed to restoring 15 billion trees. The question is, where are those tree seedlings coming from? It is in the community. If we organized women groups and youth groups and empowered them to produce these seedlings, we have nurtured a whole generation of conservationists, but also empowered them and put money into their pockets. But coming to business, I was in a session yesterday, and I couldn't believe that MasterCard has 3 billion card holders.
Users, yeah.
And that for me is powerful because it speaks to their influence, but it also speaks to their responsibilities. We must hold business accountable, and I feel the business is not doing enough. I am a football fan, and where I come from, football is a big thing. There are teams that have up to 1.1 billion fans, and these are fanatics, and they have influence over their fans. But what are they doing with this influence? For me to succeed in the Save Our Forest KE campaign, it was thanks to the business community in Kenya. I'm a member of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. Some of them are the biggest taxpayers in Kenya, and they had the power to go to government and say, look, we are staring at a crisis, and if we don't take this action, we are doomed. That's just one example. But over and above putting pressure on government, there is also the responsibility that they have. When it comes to restoration of nature, we need money, and we need the technical know-how. What is business doing to mitigate the crisis that we are in right now? If 3 billion people have decided to go for MasterCard and not Visa, that tells you the kind of influence MasterCard has over their users. It also speaks like
I think Visa is not a sponsor today.
No.
Not that MasterCard.
No. And to be fair, I'm just and I'm not putting them on the spot. It's just that it caught my attention because this speaks to the influence of business.
But do you really think they can actually change those hearts and minds? I mean, I think it's so hard to motivate. It's what he said, like numbers move faster than hearts. But you're saying, look, no, there is this incredible power. It's latent. You're in a different generation than I am, and you're saying you see it.
I see it, and speaking to my generation, I think there is also the power of consumers. I think a time has come for us to say enough is enough. And we can boycott even products that are not adhering to protecting and conserving nature. If a company has refused to adhere to the rules, to the terms, if they're not making any progress, let's boycott them. Let's walk away from them And this is the power of the consumers. But for business, it is hard, but it's possible. It's just that we don't want to try. Because you think when you try, customers are going to walk away. But it is possible for us to influence. If at all you've been able to influence these people to consume your product, then you can influence them to also change their ways. And you have a responsibility to them to run your business sustainably. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Torben, Pension Denmark. When I hear that, I think I'm starting to sort of feel sleepy. But I learned something kind of amazing in my journey in the last couple of years about pension funds and the enormous, enormous power they have and some of the risks that they're willing to take because it's patient capital. What's Pension Denmark doing? What is the sector doing when it comes to investing in nature-positive solutions or sometimes in nature itself?
Well, thank you for also inviting a representative from the finance industry on the panel. And I fully agree that if we should be able to execute on the targets from Montreal, we need to mobilize private capital at a large scale. I think if we look at the broader group of, let's say, long-term investors, they are now, when it comes to biodiversity, where they were about climate 10 years ago. 10 years ago, most investors didn't understand the necessity for integrating climate in their investment decisions. That's no longer the case. Almost all investors have comprehensive programs for giving their contribution to the climate agenda. And we have developed a measurement where we ask companies to provide reporting on Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 when it comes to their CO2 emissions. And these figures are used actively in our investment decisions. I think that Montreal will kickstart a similar movement in our sector when it comes to biodiversity. Also, because as we heard from the minister, there are a lot of interesting business or investment opportunities in protecting nature, as is the case when it comes to climate. We have long been a large investor in renewable energy infrastructure assets like wind farms and solar farms. And during the last decade, this asset class actually has generated the most attractive returns in our fund compared with other investments. And
Torben, how big is your fund? Just how big is Pension Denmark?
Our assets are approximately 50 billion euro, something like that. And we have 10% invested in renewable energy assets. But to be honest, it's only during the last 2 years we have tried to develop a biodiversity policy as comprehensive as our climate policy. And it has to be very concrete for us. We are a large investor in real estate, and we use a substantial amount of wood as construction material. We have decided that for every cubic meter of wood we are using in construction of new buildings, we will plant new trees at the same amount. So we will gradually plant new forests, and in a 50 years' time, we can probably use the wood for the construction activities taking place at that time. So it's a more.
So are you doing that as a business opportunity, or are you doing that as a philanthropic opportunity?
No, it's both and, because forestry is also an attractive long-term investment for a pension fund, because the demand for wood are increasing, because wood is substituting other building materials worldwide. So it's both a way to give a very concrete contribution to biodiversity, but also investment opportunity. When we are constructing offshore wind farms, we now create an artificial reef around the pillars who are carrying the turbines, creating a new habitat at the bottom of the seabed, and actually leaving the seabed with a higher level of biodiversity than before the construction of the offshore wind farms. And we have decided that we, in our real estate business, will not only do this wood for free thing, but also have adopted a biodiversity program. We will make sure that we are nature positive. So, you get what you measure. So before we start up a new construction project, we measure the biodiversity on the land, and we guarantee that when we have finished the construction, biodiversity will be higher than before. Yep. That's also a good business case, because people who are to either those who, if we're building a housing complex, people who are to decide a new place to live, they will have a preference for living in an area with a high level of biodiversity compared with the opposite. So we think that there's also a good business case in integrating biodiversity in a real estate decision.
Sure.
Now Sven mentioned fertilizing. I think we should also think of integrating, let's say, climate investments with biodiversity. I mentioned the idea with the wind farms and reefs, but the next generation of green wind power will be, to a substantial part, used to the production of green hydrogen. Not only green power into the grid, but as a resource to, through electrolysis, produce green hydrogen, which can be transformed into green ammonia, and to be used to provide the agricultural sector with climate-friendly fertilizers. Yeah. We can also use. We have invested in plants using low-quality bio waste to produce what we call bio coal, which can also be used in farming as a substitute to traditional fertilizer.
So
I think there are a number of areas we
Sure. I want to open this up to the audience, because we've got a great number of people here who are real experts. I'm sure they have questions for folks. I wanted to ask a very quick little question for you, which Akanksha, you and I were just chatting about just before we started. When you think about pension funds, you're obviously taking care of people's retirement money. It's like you're supposed to be the safest sort of fund, right? Because this is people's end of life or the sunset years, taking care of them. And yet it's also patient money. So you can invest in things that the return might be, long-term. Nature takes time to grow. Do you see there a tension between the risk avoidance that you might want to take from your customers or your clients, as well as the fact that because you're patient, you can make some of these long-term plays?
Well, first of all, you have to take risk in order to get returns. So risk-taking and risk monitoring is a central part of being a pension fund. And, maybe 10 years ago, you could argue that you should choose between going for profit or doing something good for society. That's not longer the case.
Really?
Doing good and doing well at the same time is actually the most attractive investment universe you can get into. And I think, as you said it quite well, the fact that we have to, a young member now entering our pension fund, 20 years old, she will retire in 50 years' time, and then she will probably live until she is 100 years old. So I will have to take care of her savings for 50 years and then provide her with benefits for 30 years. So it's a relatively long perspective, yes, this relationship. So, and I think we're not only focused on, let's say, financial return, because I also care of the world she will be living in when she retires. That's why that's one of the reasons for our engagement in the climate agenda, and also, I think, raison d'etre for having a strong position in biodiversity. Right. Yeah.
Folks, I'd love to open this up to questions. It'd be nice, come to Eva first, it'd be nice if you mentioned who you are, especially for our online audience. And you can either direct it to a question or make it general, and I'll parse it out. And short questions and short answers, because I'd love to get as many in possible. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. I'm Eva Zabay. I lead Business for Nature. And I was just wondering, we've heard of the levers of policy, which are fantastic, consumers a bit, and I just wanted to dig a little bit into the investors and the shareholders, and how day-to-day are you getting questions about your risks, impacts, and dependencies on nature? Do you anticipate that to evolve, and what would that change in your own business? Thanks.
Sure, I'll put that to the two of you. Sen, do you want to go first, and then Jonathan quickly?
Well, it's been a huge change from the investors. If I go 5-6 years back, I probably had 2 or 3 investors that asked anything about ESG, and if and the other ones, if they did ask a question, it would be someone that they brought in at the end of the IR meetings and tick some boxes. But that has completely changed when it comes to ESG, and I think this will happen also now to a much greater extent with nature, because of the awareness around this and the impact that we have on nature and metrics and so on. So we're putting in place that. We've changed our ambition statement in the Art International to growing a nature positive future, so that it really is something that we're working on in the company to internalize it, and really this has to be a connection also with business, and as we heard in the REF report before, it's business and nature, right, Kangsha? So it's about bringing in business, embedding it, and turning it into business opportunity, but also holding ourselves accountable, and we expect the investors will do that. Jonathan?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there are 2 sides of the investment funds. One is usually the ESG management side of it, where of course they have their scorecards and the way that they rate companies on their performance. So they are interested in the data that we produce. Talking to the investment managers and the portfolio managers, there's more conversation now about decarbonisation, because they recognise we have to spend billions of dollars to decarbonise. So far, very little conversation around nature. Usually the most common question from any investor at the end of every meeting is, what did I miss? And we will tell them that we've made a nature positive commitment. The reason we've done this is because on the one hand, we think it'll give us competitive advantage, because we want access to more resources to develop the copper that the world needs. Being environmentally responsible and taking care of the communities and the land in which we operate will help us to do that. Secondly, if you take care of nature, you have more resilience in your operations and supply chain ultimately. So there are ways in which this translates into shareholder value. They're not yet asking the question, but we are selling the case to them.
That's great. Are you both parents?
Yes.
Do your kids ask you about this?
From my teenage daughters, I've got 3 girls, have given me a very hard time for a long time about working in the mining.
Good for them.
But in recent years, when we've been able to show them the work we do with indigenous communities, the investment we make in climate change, and now the investment in nature, they recognize that actually mining can be a force for good.
I remember Alan Jope at an early WEF, maybe in 2019, saying how his son points out litter at the beach and says, "Dad, did you make that? Dad, did you make that?" He's like, I got to get this right. We had one question from back there. Someone had their hand up. Yes, sir, please, in your name, and then I'll go over here. Come to you.
Yeah, my name is Rolly van Happert. I'm I would say an amateur conservationist. But the key issue I think we haven't addressed here is that we need to protect our last wild places in the world, just the ecosystems that I think will disappear within the next 5-10 years. So we need emergency funding. We can talk about business, we can talk about all, but who's going to do it? If you look at Africa, we may have 40 to 50 places that are worth saving, that are still having, let's say, a biome that can be saved. If we don't do anything over the next 5 to 10 years, these will be gone. And if you calculate it, we don't need that much money. We probably only need 1.5 to 2 billion to actually do this. And why are we? And we're talking here about trillions and billions of let's say transfers. Why can we not get that done? Take, for example, the oceans. The oceans are now, I think, 7 to 8% protected. It may have cost not more than 200 million to get there.
Yes.
We only need 250 to 300 million to achieve 20%. Why are we not able to raise it? And I think, let's say, as a philanthropist, you can't do it on yourself. We need governments. We need governments and institutions to step in. And it's not much that we're asking. And so why are we not get this first, get this arranged first before we look at carbon pricing, before we look at business for nature, what pension funds can do? Because we've been talking for this for ages already. We need to do something right now. That's the issue.
I mean, I think your point is well taken. I'm not going to parse it to the panel here. I mean, I guess what I would comment and say, Johan Rockström made this point as well yesterday. Like, some places are just worth saving. We know what to do. We just need to get it done now. I think, in addition to what you're saying, you do need to think about long-term sustainable financing, right? So, philanthropic money eventually dries up, and then the whole thing falls apart. And so you do need the underlying system changes to happen.
Take Africa.
Sure.
2 billion of capital, let's say one big reserve will cost you 5 to 6 million a year. If you can secure for the next 15 years a secure financing, and I think over time you get carbon pricing and carbon income coming in, you get tourism revenue coming in, so that will actually, you can save 30, 40 very big pristine areas. And it's actually, and so with the capital, let's say, revenue from the capital and spending it, you can actually map it out.
Look, we had 2 bills in the US Congress this year, both got killed at the last moment, that would have provided funding for exactly this sort of thing. I just want to get other points in here. I think it's well taken. There are some things that need to be done now. But nevertheless, I think that what everyone here is doing is extraordinarily important, because you really do need system changes. And I will say, even these pristine areas, the Amazon is about the size of Spain, and it actually has a population bigger than Spain. So you are not going to save it just by saying we're going to save it. You also have to think about the 25 million just in Brazil alone, but probably 48 million in the Amazon basin, and the livelihoods and pathways there. Otherwise, it's a eventually losing battle. Yes, sir, back there, and then you had a question, and I'll come to you. Okay, we've got 3 minutes, Jesus. Okay, so 10 seconds each.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Onte. I come from Indonesian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Thank you. We learned here, and I want to tell in Indonesian Chambers of Commerce, we have a hub for the net zero and regenerative farming and agriculture. We do want to learn more, because we know, myself, my company also maybe do not good in the past, but we must move fast now with the good thing. And yeah, we learn, and I hope we can continue for Indonesia Chambers of Commerce hub for regenerative agriculture here, and maybe we'll continue the connection. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Very quick.
Sure.
It will be very quick. I had 2 quick questions.
Hang on one sec. Just wait till, just so that the audience can.
Yes,
Yeah.
sure. 2 forward-looking questions. My name's Naomi. I come from Australia. I work at a company called West Farmers, a diversified conglomerate. For Torben, a quick question for you. You said from a nature standpoint, we're 10 years behind, circa where we were from a climate standpoint. Do you think that catching up from nature in your industry happens faster than happened for climate? So can we do it in 5? And for Jonathan, the green premium, you mentioned that you're not seeing yet. How far away do you think it is?
30 seconds each.
Yeah, the answer is yes. We will not use 10 years when it comes to biodiversity. You get what you measure, and that's why we're looking forward to the recommendations from the so-called task force on nature-related disclosures. And we have to work together with the Big Four. The audit companies will be crucial in assisting companies in doing the figures right. And this will encourage investors also to have this on their focus, in the focus. When we are engaging with we have approximately 1,000 companies in our equity portfolio, and we are engaging with many of them together with like-minded investors. We now have 3 issues we are discussing with the companies: climate, gender diversity, and now also biodiversity. And I think this is a trend which will mean that we will, in a few years' time, have a situation similar to what we have in climate on biodiversity.
30 seconds, because I want to give the last word to Wanju.
Yeah, look, I think there's two prerequisites to that happening. The first is we need consistent frameworks that all operations can be measured against. We have some of that. There's something called the copper mark, and we have a number of our operations certified. The second is going to be data-based value chain tracking systems, which require sort of interoperable blockchain technology to enable that to happen. This could be done in 3 to 5 years. Whether it shows up as a green premium or a brown discount doesn't really matter because the effect will be the same, but we're getting close, I think.
Wanju, we have 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Instead of me summing up, do you think you can sum up or at least give us some words to take into the future?
I think it's important that we incorporate the indigenous communities or the true custodians of the ecosystems and investing in them, ensuring that they are not left in poverty and they benefit from all the benefits that are going to be derived from the ecosystems that they live around. And one of the ways is looking at how can we coexist with nature. For instance, how can we start businesses around the nature that do not affect the natural state of the said nature. I give an example of beekeeping, and businesses can actually invest in such projects and help uplift the livelihoods of the people.
Are you hopeful?
I'm very hopeful. I look at climate action as a business, and that gives me a lot of hope. I love forests, and every time I look at the forests in my village, I see a huge opportunity of creating employment, especially for the youth in Africa.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you.